I will share with you the slide on chapter 5 titled hypothesis testing. Previously in chapter 4 we learned about probability and hypothesis, which is after we have those 4 criteria for probability assumptions. Random sampling, for example, those number of your respondents. Now we will look into hypothesis testing. Okay. How do you do hypothesis? Okay. Hypothesis is a tentative statement about something. Tentative statement is kind of the plan, the basic predictions you expect from your research. Yeah? Your statement should concern with differences between groups or relationships between variables. Differences between groups, usually we have t-test, individual sample t-test, paired sample t-test from within one or two variables with the groups. Group means gender. Gender, we have only 2 groups, male and female, or other groups of TBA group. For example, we have 10 TBA groups, so we will use ANOVA because we have more than 2 groups. Relationship, we have correlation, we have chi-square test, chi-square or chi-square. Some people call it chi-square or chi-square. So the relationship will look into variables. You look into how that effective self-esteem influence your effectiveness, communication effectiveness. That's what we mean by relationship. The higher your self-esteem is, the higher your communication effectiveness will be. That's what we mean by relationship. The differences is to look at one variable and how does it differ from male and female. How that communication effectiveness differ from TBA1 among TBA1, TBA2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We will use another analysis. So that hypothesis must concern with these 2 differences and relationship. Okay, I repeat, your hypothesis is concerned with differences and relationship. Statement related to our prediction about population characteristics or relationship. That statement must relate to research question. So if you look at differences, then you must have your research question concerning differences. For example, how do communication effectiveness differ from TBA1 to TBA2, TBA3, TBA4, TBA5, TBA6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You must have that in your questions. Only then you can have your hypothesis that communication effectiveness may differ from one group to another group. Statement must be testable or verifiable. We can validate, we can quantify. We can quantify mean we can calculate. We can key in your SPSS in numbers, which will allow you to test the differences. In hypothesis statement, this will help you first to draw a conclusion. You can conclude whether there is differences or there is correlation. And then you can make implication. If self-esteem differs from male and female, what is the implication then? How can you make implication from that finding? The male and female have different self-esteem. How do you see this as implication? So when there is differences between the gender, we can say that the woman can communicate more effective because their self-esteem is higher than male. So what do you suggest? How can you make suggestion from that? In order for career, for example, for industries to have better spokesperson in the organization, there is a greater likelihood that female will be employed higher than male. Yeah. So first, draw conclusion. Second, making implication. What does it imply? When we know that woman has a higher self-esteem than man, then make suggestion. If female has a higher self-esteem, how do you suggest? So you can say that it can be suggested that if you want to employ a spokesperson, the woman is better of the employment than man. That is example only. Statistical test is to test the hypothesis. So how do we do it? There are two types of hypothesis. First is null hypothesis, and second is alternative hypothesis. Null hypothesis, and okay, there is example here. Okay, I'm not worried now. So there again, I repeat, there are two types of hypothesis. The first one is null hypothesis, and the second one is alternative. Null hypothesis is a statement of no difference or no association, no relationship among the variables, samples, etc. Example, let's say we are looking at differences. Null hypothesis is there is no significant difference of communication skill between male and female. That is null hypothesis for differences. If we want to have null hypothesis for association or relationship, this is the example. There is no significant relationship between age and communication skill. Okay. In short, I want to simplify that when it comes to null hypothesis, your statement should highlight that there is no significant differences, there is no significant relationship or association. That is for null hypothesis. Alternative or research hypothesis refers to a statement that asserts differences or association among variables, samples, etc., genders, or other variables. Recently or previously, we have null hypothesis for difference. Now, what happened to alternative hypothesis for differences? There is significant difference of communication skill between male and female. We highlight that there is differences. In null hypothesis, we highlight no difference in hypothesis. We emphasize on the existence of differences. Alternative hypothesis for here we have there is significant relationship or there is significant association between age and communication skill. We highlight the existence that the relationship occurs between the variables. When we speak about relationship, it can be two variables or more. There are two forms of hypothesis. Okay. First is directional hypothesis. Sorry, the first one is non-directional hypothesis. Non-directional, null hypothesis, there is no significant difference of communication skill between male and female. And then non-directional in terms of association or relationship, the null hypothesis, we can state that there is no significant relationship between age and communication skill. You can see the symbol, yeah? The U means differences and the relationship RHO. And the alternative hypothesis for non-directional in relationship, we have to say that there is a relationship between age and communication skills. This is for two areas of differences and relationship. How about directional? Okay. Significant differences in terms of differences only. We just highlight that there is differences, but we do not go into specific. But directional hypothesis, the null hypothesis should sound there is no significant, while alternative hypothesis will sound this way. Male students have more or less communication skill than female. There is significant difference. We only say that there is difference, but in directional hypothesis, even better, you have to be very specific which one has greater communication skill, male or female. That is the alternative hypothesis for directional hypothesis. Same goes with relationship. The null hypothesis is same, but when we go to alternative, we have to mention that there is significant positive. What type of relationship? Negative or positive? So if it's positive, then you say there is significant positive relationship between age and communication skill. So what is different between positive and negative? Okay, good. Positive relationship means as the age goes up, the communication skills also goes up. Yeah, goes up together. That is positive. But if there is negative findings, negative in the score, even though we can say even though the age increase, it does not does not. Even though the age goes up, I mean the higher the age is, the relationship skill. Okay, I repeat. If it is positive, both as the age increase, the communication skill becomes lower. Good. Yeah, one up and one down. So that is negative relationship means. There are 5 steps for hypothesis testing. The first one is making assumptions. Sample selected randomly, define population, what is the larger group, and then it must be interval ratio data. What do we mean by interval? Interval means there is a range, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, so that is interval. While ratio should be a score, yeah? Not male and female. Male and female is nominal. Education, that is ordinal. Education, certificate, degree, master, that is ordinal. So what type of data do we need for hypothesis? Only accept interval and ratio data. Sampling distribution should be normal. How do you check if it is normal or not? We look at the probability. Okay. Now we begin with the 5 steps. This one is the basic. Before we do the hypothesis testing, this is the basic. Okay. The first one, we should state the null and research hypothesis. What do we mean by null and research hypothesis? So we must have the H0 and HA. Must state the both. Okay. And then you calculate the test statistic in SPSS. We can calculate it manually, but in this class we use SPSS. Identify the third step, identify the level of significant and critical region. So when we analyze, there will be results. So with the results, you must look at, first is the level of significance. See, 0.05. It must be less than 0.05. If the significant value says 0.07, khalas, you cannot use, you will say there's no significant differences. You should go direct to that decision. You don't need any doubts with that differences because it's more than 0.05. But if it is less than 0.05, then there is differences. It is significant. Critical region will determine the rejection or failure to reject the null hypothesis. Okay. Step 3, you look at the p-value, the significant value. Then step 4, if there is differences, you should make decision. If the test statistic falls into the you should reject the null hypothesis because no significant differences. So when your findings say there is significant differences, we reject the null hypothesis. I repeat, if your findings has significant value, when your null hypothesis says no differences, but your findings say there is differences, so you should reject the null hypothesis. But if the test statistics fall in the critical region, we should say that we fail to reject the null hypothesis at predetermined alpha level. Yeah? So when you have no significant differences in your analysis, you should say fail to reject. Yeah, so you must look at this. If there is no significance, you must say we fail to reject the null hypothesis. If there is differences, you say reject the null hypothesis. Step 5, state the conclusion. Make conclusion based on hypothesis and decision. What do we learn from the hypothesis and what do we learn from the decision? There are two types of errors. Type 1 and type 2 errors. Type 1 error, the probability of rejecting a null hypothesis, yes, that is in fact true. Reject the null hypothesis. And then type 2 is the probability of fail to reject the null hypothesis, in fact false, in which type 1 error mentioning about the agreement that there is differences, and the second one is to admit that there is differences, fail to reject the null hypothesis. Okay, that is just it's about hypothesis testing. Alpha error and beta error. Okay. Let's look at level of significance. The probability of error under the sampling distribution that contains unlikely sample outcomes, given that the null hypothesis is true. So the probability of type 1 error, commonly expressed as 0.10, 0.05, or 0.01. 95% or 90%. 95% refers to alpha 0.05, which means that we are 95%. We are 95% sure of making right decision and 5% error. While critical region is the area under the sampling distribution. Yeah. Is defined as including unlikely sample outcome, given that the null hypothesis is true. This critical region is the area under the sampling distribution. The critical value of the test statistic to reject hypothesis. The value is defined from the test. From the test statistic table. Critical value is defined from the test statistic table corresponding to its level of significance and degree of freedom. DF, degree of freedom, is the symbol is DF. The null hypothesis is rejected when the value of test statistics exceeds the critical value and lies in the critical region. There are one-tail and two-tail tests. Critical region on one side or both sides of the distribution, depending on the nature of alternative or research hypothesis. This is null hypothesis. This is alternative hypothesis. One tail, still we have here alternative HA, and then A is less than B. Okay. One tail, okay, one tail test is a type of hypothesis used when the direction of the difference between variables or samples can be predicted, which is directional hypothesis. Then we use one-tail test. One-tail test has one critical region. Yeah. That correspond to the direction of the research hypothesis. That is one-tail test. Two-tail test is a type of hypothesis test used when direction of differences between variables or samples cannot be predicted. Non-directional. We can say that there is no differences, and then when we say non-directional, we will say there is significant difference between male and female. We do not highlight which one is better. We cannot highlight that one is better than the others. So that is about two-tail test. The two-tail test has two critical regions on both sides of the distribution. Yeah. With that, two-tail test has two critical regions on both sides of the distribution. So with that, thank you very much for your attention towards this chapter.